Welcome to another episode of the C-Suite Muse, the podcast that inspires leaders to step out of their comfort zones and embrace new perspectives. We're here to challenge beliefs, tackle taboo subjects, and open discussions about what it takes to become the world leaders of tomorrow. Through our discussions with thought leaders, business experts, innovative entrepreneurs, and very interesting guests, we'll explore topics like the future of work, diversity and inclusion, the role of creativity, and yes, even pleasure in leadership. No subject is too taboo here. So if you're ready to challenge your assumptions, explore new perspectives, and become a true leader of tomorrow, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Marianne St. Clair. So sit back and relax, or run that marathon and get ready to be inspired as we dive into the creative, inspiring mind of a true C-Suite Muse. Welcome to another episode of the C-Suite Muse. I am your host, Marianne St. Clair, and I am here with my magnificent guest. I'm going to let her introduce herself. Kerri, go for it. Give them everything you got on who you are, why you are so passionate, and why we're talking today.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Marianne. I'm so excited to be here and chat with you. And your work that you've been doing it really resonates with me. And I think that's why I'm like extra excited about this conversation today. I worked in the corporate world for over 10 years and led recruiting teams for big companies, small companies, like Amazon, PayPal, Indeed.com. And I like to tell people that I was an expert corporate ladder climber.
Ooh,
so
love that, because if ever there's something that somebody can resonate with, it's the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
And that visual is just so there.
Right.
You helped others climb it too, right?
Oh, yes, 100%. And it's funny because I literally remember like being in that corporate role and like seeing this imaginary ladder and seeing the job titles that would go up the ladder, which meant in my mind at the time that it made me more successful. And just so I had kind of set this finish line for myself, and I decided if I made it to the VP level role, that meant that I made it in life. Like that was my success. And
you had that title, that role, that thing that validated your existence. And that's what I see that so many of us do, is we want that external validation by that title.
Yeah.
Did it have any other meaning for you?
I mean, it had a lot of meaning for me. It really it defined who I was as a person for so long. Like I had made it to the step under VP. I had a big team I was leading, and I was about to get promoted into that VP role. And then I just realized that I couldn't do it anymore, and that I was wearing this fake mask, pretending that everything was great at work when inside I was dying. And so I made the leap and I quit. And it was scary, but it was powerful, and I don't regret it for a second, because my mental health was drained because of this role that I had been playing in the corporate world for so long.
Do you remember that day? Was there like a defining moment that you can go back to and remember when you decided that enough is enough?
That's a good question. It definitely was. I remember it was like a slowish kind of realization. But then once I realized what was happening, I couldn't continue on. Like, it wasn't fair to my team to have this leader who was miserable showing up for work every day. And I couldn't fake it anymore, to my boss. Like, I would go to meetings and I was just an angry person. didn't want to
right?
be there.
Right? I kind of equate that slow progression that you talk about as kind of like the frog, where you put the frog in the pot and you slowly
Yes.
turn up the heat. And then before you know, if you don't leap out, you're cooked. And that's kind of what burnout, like, it's, you don't realize that day in and day out, your soul is being
Sucked
just sucked
dry.
out of you, right? And that's,
Yeah.
to me, and that's what corporate is. It's kind
Yeah.
of like this big soul sucker where
Yeah.
once, if you don't wake up before it does, then, you know, and make that leap out, then it's just all consuming. And what I didn't go back in, but I have the statistics somewhere where the actual rate of suicides among um top executives and corporations are just climbing. And we
Yeah.
saw that not too long ago with that
The Bed Bath and Beyond.
Bed Bath and Beyond leaping out the window. And that just, if that isn't a wake up call
I had
for
the
some
exact same
people to
thought.
start searching their souls and looking for a solution. Not everybody has to leave, but you definitely have to come back home to your soul. You have to come back home and find that way to incorporate you in with what you're doing. So it sounds like you've been on a journey. Tell me more.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. Like and you get to a point where you don't even realize that it's happening. And I think that's what's really scary, especially what we saw with the leader of Bed Bath and Beyond. Like he was
That's
just
only
in,
one. There's
that
more.
is only one, but it's a perfect example of this like role that he was playing to the public, and he literally lost himself in this role. And it got to a point where he just couldn't take it because he was so disconnected from who he really was. And
Yeah,
it
there's just
happens to
such.
so many people.
And so, can we go over to the other part that we kind of talked about earlier before this call about what was a way that you were coping with being in that disconnected space, that numbing space, that how were you coping with it?
Well, that's the crazier part is I got to a point where I was drinking 2 bottles of wine a night, and
Mm.
I would wake up and my body was just so used to being in that numb feeling that I would go to work. Nobody knew that Kerri was living a life of being hungover every day. And I would go to work and then I would get off around, I mean, sometimes I would start drinking around 3, 4 o'clock while I was still working. And it was the only way that I knew how to cope with the insane feelings that I was having, but didn't want to be having, frankly. Because I thought I was where I was supposed to be. Society builds this big picture of what it looks like to be successful. And so I had deemed that was my life. Like that's what I was supposed to be doing. But I didn't want to be doing it.
Well, so if you were, having to self-medicate,
Mm-hmm.
and what was that, did it continue to numb you, or did it pacify the, like, there's escaping the rigors of work, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a point of, oh my gosh, I can no longer stand myself, that I begin to lose myself in that numbing feeling. And so then to fit in to society, I have to, some people do it to feel like the party girl, or some
Mm-hmm.
people, the life of the party, let's drink a
Yeah.
little bit and, what can you say there? Because I want people to see themselves. I want
Yeah.
them to get a glimpse of where they are in this numbing place. And if you can really search back and feel what was happening, who you were being, and give us a picture there.
I love this question because I can look back and I so clearly see like the progression that I had. So I remember in 2016, I had just gotten a job at Indeed, and it was our big it was like this big party, the company party they were having after a conference that they hosted. And I was, funny enough, with my boss, who we were pretty much just acting like party girls, and we got completely drunk at this thing. And so for a while I had this party girl image, and it was like, oh, she's the fun one. Oh, I was known as the bubbles girl because I always had champagne because it made me fancy. And I was in that role. But then as I continued to climb the corporate ladder, I was like, well, I can't be the party girl anymore. I have to be the put together person. So that's when it it shifted, and I wasn't the party girl. I was trying to be the executive who maybe would have a glass of wine or two with dinner. But then I remember going to dinners and I was always the one who'd finish my glass first. And I was always the one who'd be asking for more or ordering a separate glass from everybody else who was sharing a bottle. And so it was like a progression of the disease happening to me as I continued to lose myself more and more to my job. And then by the end, it was really, I would drink to reward myself, right? Like, I had such a hard day at work. I deserve a glass of wine. I deserve a bottle of wine. And I think that's what, I remember my boss did that too. She'd be like, all right, everybody leave, go get a glass of wine. And it's like, it's just built
Corporate
in.
culture? Is it a
Yes,
corporate culture?
it's just built into it.
And then so, in my kind of research, and I have in my master class I talk about, it's real easy when you get up into those top rungs. You have the money, you have the resources all around you. You have, like, you said teams. I have people to do things for me. It's not um it's not abnormal for somebody in the higher ranks just to lose themselves into that numbing, because they have people all around them to support them in that. Oh, he's gone to lunch, he's on a business lunch. Oh, she's gone and done something. So it becomes very much a hidden, I feel almost like a hidden cry, a hidden epidemic, a hidden,
Yeah,
it's that it's covered up. It's
100%. It is. And that is I've talked about this actually on a podcast I was on late last year. Like, that is the scariest part of it, is when you have people in the corporate world who, on the outside, they look like they're happy and successful and they're thriving. But when you really know what's going on and you rip off the mask, they're struggling so much. And especially, I think, when it comes to men in the corporate world. And I think this is a problem with both, but I think when it comes to men, they are expected to be these strong, independent, stable people. And so we tend to see a lot of men wear the mask stronger than ever because they have to perform, because that's how they're groomed. And then they go home and they drink themselves half to death because they're absolutely miserable of playing this false role and narrative as this successful masculine in the corporate world.
So let's get over to a few more of the addictions, just because there's more. So we have alcohol addiction, that it's in our culture. It's very acceptable
Yes.
and it's part of the culture.
Yep.
But then we have the porn culture and we have the
Mm-hmm.
sex addict.
Mm-hmm.
And there you want the dopamine hit. There you want that, you want to feel like, you can chase money and chase sex are the two biggest things
Yeah.
that a lot of, I want to say male, because it's more in the male culture than it technically, um, it's more prevalent in the
Yes,
male
I
culture
agree.
and as men than in women. And that doesn't mean, and I don't want everybody to think, oh, it's not, women don't have that. But I think it's a lot more because we don't have this internal balance of the masculine and feminine, and males have really been given the raw, because you said something a minute ago about being groomed. And I
Mhm.
think about how in our society and in the world where there are sexual predators that groom, um, their um their bait or whatever you want to call it. But I
Yeah.
think it's what's happened to our souls also, is you've been groomed to think that this carrot up there called a VP is what you want to obtain, and you'll sell your soul, you'll sell
Yeah.
everything to get it. And
Mm-hmm.
then when you get there, it's like, what the
Oh.
hell? What the hell?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's more addictions too. There's sexual addiction. There's a lot of, I have a really good friend who, she has a program called Recovery at Home, and they're pretty much in the alcohol and drug recovery for executives. And we talk a lot about this, and we talk a lot about how, that numbing happens. And then if there's not, they've made some progress as far as addiction, but if you don't get into, one, the root cause, and two, if you don't do this reconnecting with your soul, then it's just going to be relapse, 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 in my honest opinion. So
Yeah.
let's talk about, how did you walk back out of that, and where did it take you in reconnecting with you?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I completely agree with you. So after I got sober and I quit my corporate job, I actually took a course called The Psychology of Recovery and Addiction through Stanford University. Like I wanted to learn. I had started doing my own healing work, and we can talk a little bit about that, but I really wanted to learn like the science behind it. And I so clearly started to realize that people continue to like you can get sober, but unless you dig in and figure out why did you start using in the first place? What part of yourself are you running from? You're always going to continue to relapse because you haven't healed what's made you started drinking in the first place. I mean, I had to go back to my childhood.
Yes,
I
most of us
realized,
do.
yeah,
It
I
starts
realized
there.
I had severe anxious attachment wounds. I had abandonment wounds. My father was an alcoholic when I was growing up. And so I really had to,
Generational.
yes. And I'm here to break some cycles, Marianne. And
Yes, yes, I hear
it's,
that.
it runs so deep in my lineage. And I started just digging into, okay, well, why am I the way that I am? Like, what is it from my childhood that I'm running from? Why is my inner child so terrified of everything? And it wasn't until I really, really started digging into that type of work, um, that I was able to really break that trigger in my mind to want to drink when things happened. Because if that trigger came up, I'd know exactly where it was coming from, and I could work through it and talk myself through it to really change the way that my brain pattern was working.
Ah, you're, as another friend of mine calls, you were rewiring to rise.
Exactly.
You're
That's it.
rewiring that brain. You were
Love
coming
that.
into a wonderful place of creating new neural pathways. So it didn't
Yeah.
just take you right back there every time. Well, good for you, because this work is not easy work. Not everybody is going to dig as deep as you did, and especially, go to the psychology of it and want to know the science behind. So, congratulations on that. That's
Thank you. It's
incredible.
this work is not for the faint of heart, and there's a reason why everybody doesn't do it, because it sucks. It's hard, and you will go through some of the hardest moments of your life as you realize, you relive these memories that cause you to be the way that you are. And then the more that you just start peeling away the layers, you start to realize, like, I don't really know who I am. Like, every decision I made, everything I wanted in life, it wasn't me. It was all put on me from my family or society, or it's
Right?
mind-blowing sometimes.
It's total mind blowing because we're just like a computer that's been programmed.
Yes,
You
I
know,
tell everybody that.
yes, we are a computer that has been programmed. And when it may be tough work, it may be not so easy, but those of us who have already gone through it, I feel we shorten the time for those who come after us, those who want to jump in. We can lead them because we've developed some tools and some patterns that, you know, it doesn't have to be as hard. It was hard for some of us because I mean we really had to oh, shovel the shit.
Mhm.
I call it the beliefs barriers and bullshit that were fed to us. And I feel like we're really at a time, and it's a wonderful time to be alive. It's a wonderful time because I feel like I'm sure you are familiar with the chakras.
Oh, yes, I do.
Okay.
I do Reiki and energy healing. I love my chakras.
So if you think about the chakras, and if each, and for those of you who don't know who are listening to this, the chakras are um, gates. They're basically the way energy comes into your body and it exits your body, and how it comes in is based upon whether or not you are constricted, or if you're open, it can
Mhm.
come in. And it's based with the emotions, and there's lots of things that play into it, and it feeds all of the energy, all of our organs, all. But when you think about the chakras and you think about each one to me goes with a decade. And so, like, we go around the depression era, when we were basically in survival, and then we can go up to, when we were basically, that is the root chakra, and, getting our needs met and everything. And then if we keep climbing, you can see when the 70s and all of love, and then, voicing but we're up here right now. We're in
Mhm.
this time
Mhm.
of clearing all this shit out so that we can, you know, elevate. We
Yeah.
can move to a new dimension. And all this baggage and all this stuff has to come out of our wiring, out of our DNA and everything, so we can be very light. And so
Mhm.
that's very heady, but
Yeah.
let's go over for now and talk about this thing that both of us are very passionate about the masculine and the feminine energy.
Mhm.
So, how did you get on a quest of, learning about, you know, how um toxic masculine corporate world is very toxic in the masculine? How did you really start to uncover that for yourself?
So when I worked in the corporate world, I didn't even know there was such a thing as like we all have masculine and feminine energy. And I think a lot of times people just assume that's gender, but it's not. Like for everyone listening, we're not talking gender, we're talking about energy.
Not talking
And
about a man or a woman.
yeah,
We all have masculine and feminine in us.
yes. And so when I left my job and started doing more of the inner work and the inner child healing, I started learning about this concept of masculine and feminine energy and learning what each of them were and how they showed up in your life. And that's when I had this like massive realization. And I'm
An
like,
epiphany that went,
yes,
oh,
I was like, I have been living in my masculine energy for so much of my life. I was completely disconnected from my feminine energy. And when I was living, because of the way I lived in the corporate world and climbing that ladder, and I mean, let's face it, like there are more executives in leadership roles that are men than women. And so they tend to lead more with their masculine energy. And so I had to bring mine out to just try to keep up. And I had to try to really keep up with this heavy structure and no emotions and power and always wanting to win and be the best. And so once I realized how much I was living like that, I almost like, and I can totally see now why people become feminists because they go from heavy masculine to heavy feminine so fast that I was like, I want nothing to do with my masculine. Like, I need to be nurturing my feminine side. And so I did that for a while. And then that's when I really started working on the balance of them and how can I use my masculine energy to support my feminine energy and come back out to the world and have that nice blend of both because it's a tricky thing to balance inside yourself, especially when you have no awareness of it.
so I like to use a different word. I'm going to throw it in here.
Okay.
So I'm not a proponent of the word balance. So I'm just going to throw that in there.
That's
I'm a
fair.
proponent into integration. And the reason I'm not a proponent of balance is the more you try to balance your life, I hear this work-life balance. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to go all in at work, and then sometimes you go all in on home. But there's this integration that can really happen when you know how to call upon and get the masculine in you to feel safe and create a structure. So I want to talk just a minute because we're talking way probably over their heads on what masculine and feminine is. I like to, and I want your definition also, but I like to think of masculine as the banks of a river. If you didn't have the banks of the river, and that's where the safety comes in, that's where the structure comes in. The feminine is like the water. It's like the
Mhm.
river. It's like the flow.
Mhm.
And if you didn't have that structure of the masculine, the water would just go everywhere. It would be like quicksand. It would be, overflowing the banks. It would be chaos. It would be craziness. And then it would be stagnant. And all of feminine is kind of like if you just had all feminine energy, it's like you're never going to get shit done. You're never going
Yep.
to act upon anything, do anything. But when you have the structure of the masculine, and it took me, I'm kind of the opposite. I was so much in my feminine, and I felt like I was not supported by my masculine.
Mhm.
I had to really wake up and go, oh my gosh, it's always been there. I have a roof over my head. I have food in my cupboards, and I have all this stuff. The masculine is there. It's not gone. It didn't abandon me. It's just I'm not fully integrating all of it in me. So give me how do you define so that they can hear? How do you define masculine and feminine? What is the analogy you give?
Well, I think the river bank analogy is the best thing I've heard yet. I mean, that's 100% what it is. Like the feminine is the flow and the masculine is like the structure, the supporting structure.
Awesome.
And I think, like, when I think about, and obviously, the goal is to be able, like you said, to integrate them both and to be in full unity with both of them at the same time. And for me, I think the reason why I use the word balance sometimes when it comes to this is because when I left my corporate job, I dove into my feminine energy. And I was like, when I think of the feminine energy, it's like that creative side of you, like the ideas. And I started having all of these creative ideas, but I have to use my masculine energy to bring those ideas to life, to give them structure.
And
And
to take action, right?
yes, and to take the action. And so I think that's like a really good way to put it, is like the feminine. And again, we could talk forever about the definitions of both, but to keep it simple, like the feminine is like those ideas and the ideas that come when you're in the flow, and the masculine is taking action on those ideas to bring those ideas to life.
Right. Absolutely.
And so for me, I had to find the balance of making sure I don't ignore my masculine too much and realize, like, hey, Kerri, you can have all these creative ideas that are great and beautiful, but you're never going to bring them into life until you take action with your masculine energy. So I had to make sure I didn't just focus all of my time on my feminine side.
Yeah. So let's talk about another definition I like to say is the doing versus the being.
Mm-hmm.
So the being the feminine, it's, if you think about the nature doesn't try or strive or try to climb ladders or do, and it can destruct, it can cause a earthquake or a fire or a tsunami. So it is not weak. The feminine is not weak, but at the same time, it's it is the I think, I don't know, I lost where I was going with that one.
Well, I
Go
I
ahead,
think,
jump in.
well, but you're right. Like nature's a good example of it, right? Because nature has its seasons that it goes through, and nature doesn't have to really do anything. It's there, and it goes through the actions that it needs to take to continue, processing and going in that cycle of life.
Right, and that's right, I was on that being versus the doing. So the doingness is when we can get caught up into do, going through life, being on the rat race. We wake up in the morning, we hit the buzzer on the alarm, we're off, we hit the snooze like 2 or 3 times. We're dreading going to work, but we get in our car, we drive to work, we get there, we do the motions of everything, but we forget that there's this whole other side of being that is I get my clients to set a alarm on their phone where they're just to check into their body. They're just to breathe. They're to come home to their body, and they're just to check in and to be. And I think it's so vital that we learn and awaken that parts of ourself that we abandon by the doing masculine, and we begin to awaken that feminine in us, um, into the being side, and we put as much effort in that side as we do the doing.
Yeah. And when you think about how that relates to the conversation we were having before about, working in corporate, I mean, and let me say this. We are on the right track. We are starting to see more CEOs who are embracing yoga and meditation. But I still would say if you asked the majority of C-levels out there who are running big organizations, if you said, can you just take 15 minutes around 1 o'clock every day to just stop and do nothing but sit with yourself and just be? They would think you were out of your mind.
Yeah.
They would say, we're going to be losing thousands, millions of dollars then. You know, I've got a meeting to go to. I've got to prep for this. I want to do this. And it would be a constant go, go, go. And that's why we're seeing so much burnout in the corporate America world.
I hear this over and over, and I'm going through it with a friend of mine right now, where and I can remember myself asking this, well, you're telling me to be, but how do I do that? You know? So it's like you want to figure out the actions behind and the steps you got to take and what it is to actually surrender. Well, how do I surrender? Well, what does that mean? What do you mean? How do I surrender? And that creates anxiety. That creates like what you just were mentioning, that them coming out of the doing. And let's go back to this, that 2 bottles at the end of the day. Didn't you need that medication just to slow yourself down enough to drop into bed, to crash and go to sleep? You know, it's a no wonder.
Not stopping ever.
Yeah. And did you have any, and I know this is personal and we didn't go there, but did you have any eating problems too? Because you can't be in fight and flight all the time and it not affect your ability to eat.
Yes, except I went through binge eating like struggles. Like I remember my ex-partner and I would just get so belligerent, and our bodies were like living off of alcohol, that we would just go to like the store and we would pick up as much candy as we could, and we'd be sitting in bed drinking while literally, and like even visualizing this picture, I'm like, what were you thinking, girl? But like eating just like Reese's peanut butter cups and Sour Patch Kids and just bags of it. Like our bodies, we were so disconnected. Our bodies didn't know how to live, so we just did whatever we thought we had to do.
Well, that addiction, because they talk about it in recovery and stuff, that sugar that is in all the alcohol and in all the things, it's like you have to, if you're going into recovery, you have to be able to cut the sugar addiction too. So the binge eating, but can you remember on to where you would just go through periods where you just didn't have any interest in food? Like it almost made you nauseous to be able to think about putting food in when you were in your daily go, go, go of every day?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot. Like you hear it all the time. People will say, "Oh, like it'll be 4 o'clock," and they'll be like, "Oh, I haven't eaten yet. You know, I was in meetings all day." It's like we forget about those things that we need to be doing to keep ourselves going, and instead we rely on the adrenaline of the go, 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 and it's so unhealthy, but it's such a common problem.
Well, it really, I had to understand the sympathetic in our central nervous system through my daughter, who has a very dysregulated one, and her started at age 15. And in understanding what's happening in corporate, where you are, and a lot of moms too, um, where you're going, you know, you're in that flight and fight and freeze mode. It is, in our culture, it is the norm. You know, it is
Yeah.
like the norm that everybody is going, and the vagus nerve and we're taking and we're in a hypersensitized where our bodies can't shut down, and so you need things like stimulant, or alcohol, or Xanax, or all these other things, just to get your body to go, okay, shut down enough to be able to go to sleep at night.
Yeah. And this is probably going to open up this is going to open up a whole new conversation, but I also want to point out, because we talked a little bit about addictions, Adderall is another very, very well used thing, as I have this police car at my house, because that's how intense this problem is. My ex-husband used to get a prescription for Adderall. He didn't have to do anything but tell them he was struggling to focus. And then we would share this prescription to get us through the days. And I continued to meet people who were doing the same thing. And it's like, you're already living this anxious life. Let's add in a stimulant to make you like stop eating and think that you're focusing on what you need to, when it's actually doing the exact opposite. It's a horrible problem.
It starts in college.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Adderall starts, well, hey, wait a minute, let's just go even further back to the ADHD and
Kids.
and they fed it to your generation. Your
Oh,
generation
absolutely.
was, if you weren't on it in elementary school to sit still and everything, which is just so contraindicated to kids need to get out and play. You need to get out and play. And then you're fed Adderall.
I had a teacher of my son a couple years ago ask me if I've ever considered putting him on something for his ADHD, and I try not to take it excuse me, personally, and I knew it was just
The culture.
her.
It's the
That was all she
culture.
knew. It was the culture. But I'm just like, absolutely not. I will never put my kid on that. Like, that is the worst Band-Aid you could do.
Yeah, let me take them out of your school and put them in one that's called a nature school. I started a school and had a school called the School Without Walls for my kids. And we worked with horses every day, and I had a whole,
I love that.
because let me tell you, kids are supposed to play, and we learn through play, and adults should be playing. I'm a huge advocate for pleasure and play. Those are the two things that are taken from us.
Yep. I 100% agree.
Really should be brought back in and instilled until, and if I have anything to say about it,
I agree.
it's pleasure and play.
Mhm.
Those are the things that we really should be focusing on.
And that's what's missing from adults,
Yes.
every adult's life. And that's why everybody is burning out and more miserable in the corporate world every day, because there's no pleasure and there's no play. And even though you have these companies that are trying to bring in events, like, sure, let's go to take our employees to happy hour where they can drink away their problem. Like, that's not play. We need to be connecting with our inner child and doing what yes, I love to go to arcades. Like, anytime I meet someone and they're like, do you want to go on a date? And I'm like, if you'll take me to an arcade, like, I want to do something fun.
Yes, because it's the things our souls cry out for it. And we think that, oops, family's coming in. We think that pleasure is only something that you do in bed. And the whole nuance of pleasure, from a smelling a rose, or something that, like, just even hugging yourself or touching,
this soft blanket that I keep on my lap is like such pleasure for me just throughout my day.
Yeah, it's the textures, it's the things that there's a whole realm of pleasure, and
I feel like we could do another episode on this topic.
Yes, for sure. We will talk about pleasure, and then play. Because play needs to really come back in a big way. I've been writing about play for 20 years.
Yeah.
There is just such a change in the world. I say pleasure and play are the feminine way. And
Mhm.
then also, it pays to play because
Mhm.
the dividends are amazing when we learn to have that childlike wonder, and when we can boost, ourselves by adventure and curiosity, and all of those things are in the realm of play.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So, how would they get in touch with you to learn more about the work you're doing, and tell us more about the work you're doing now?
Yeah, so I'm so excited about some of the things I have coming up. I just launched a avoiding burnout employee wellness workshop that I'm really excited to start bringing to more corporations. It's just a 2-hour employee wellness event where they can learn how to take better care of themselves, how to bring more mindfulness into their everyday, how to recognize burnout. And then I have a women's circle launching in April that will really help women just kind of start doing their own self-love work and go inward and just peeling back the layers to take back their power and control of their life.
Nah.
Um, and I also host monthly online meditation Reiki events too. So if anyone ever wants to get a little bit of extra energy healing in and clear their chakras, that is, I actually have one coming up. It's usually about every other week. So everything is on my website, kerrimckinney.com. And then on social, I'm just Kerri McKinney9.
So that is Kerri, not Y. So I'm
Yes.
gonna throw that in there for you. And in the show notes will be links to Kerri's information. And if you know of anybody who is getting near burnout or is in the corporate world, Kerri or myself, I have programs for women also, and we go in and we really give them the journey back home, coming home to their body, coming home to their sexuality, their sensuality, their femininity, and really rebirthing themselves into the world in a way that really lights them up and gets them integrating both their masculine and feminine.
Oh,
And
I love that so much.
and I do individual work around healing sexual trauma, and really embracing. I call it liberating the lusciousness,
Mhm.
liberating the lusciousness that's waiting inside of there, waiting. It's kind of like when you take and you have a peach or an orange in front of you, and you bite into that, and it's all that juice and everything. It's like it's hidden around that outside, but when you can really get in there, there's so much of you that just is exciting and ready to come out into the world. And so I love facilitating that for C-suite professionals, getting them to understand their lusciousness and how they can, avoid the trap of having to numb themselves and be able to come alive to a whole new vibe. So once again, thank you so much, Kerri, for this wonderful discussion. And there's so much more we can talk about it. And I want to have you on for a future session soon.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.